Good afternoon, Kishan.
Good afternoon, Floris.
So today we're going to talk about a startup that we got on our radar as they mentioned software modernization and the use of AI in their pitch. They got funded. It's about DesignVerse. They got funded significantly, quite significantly. They have some insights that they share on their platform that they introduced to modernize business critical, mission critical software. We tend to think that we are quite up to date on this topic, on software modernization and the use of AI. And we were quite surprised on some of the elements that they mention on specifically in the enterprise environment and specifically then also in the mission critical context. So it is impressive that they raised funds. They have two founders that have experience in the industry, but saying or relating their platform to modernizing legacy business critical systems raised some questions for us. So you read the story, Kishan. What do you think? And you checked out some details. What do you think they have built, or what do you think they're doing?
The claims are very bold. Let's put that first. It claims to do a no mistake approach to enterprise level software modernization across the board. So that means the whole environment. And I emphasize no mistakes because that's basically their tagline on the homepage that says just, hey, it doesn't fail. So that means no mistakes are made, everything works perfectly, which is the first thing. If that's the first thing I see, it's a very bold claim because humans make mistakes as well, as do agentic robots. Whatever way you put it, there will be mistakes or failures. Even if the failure is not in the software, it's in the ecosystem, around it, that something can happen. So that's a very bold statement. But of course, this is all marketing. We don't know what's behind here. But if it actually exists the way they expose it like this, and if the context layer actually does the work they claim it does, it's something everyone would want. Every enterprise would want this because if the claims actually work, that you can just ingest context and it will put out exactly production ready code that you can integrate in your environment without any work, why wouldn't anyone want this?
And they mention in their press releases and on their website and the marketing, Eurocontrol as a main client or a main use case, which is in the aviation industry, which is heavily regulated, obviously, and has very critical, mission critical software. We almost cannot imagine that they would put in a platform like this and then use that to modernize systems, except maybe for as it would have is it sort of a decoupled system or a decoupled application, or maybe only a front end revamp or something. What do you think about it? Besides the aviation industry, which is then already very difficult, this whole topic of software modernization, of then using a platform like this and then modernizing a legacy system is already very difficult. So they pick two things. Do you think maybe what is your feeling on what they did? Just like guessing, because there's nothing out there what actually says which application they modernized.
I mean, this is just all spitballing, of course, because we don't know, but probably what they modernized was some scoped application that did a certain thing that needed to be modernized. I don't know what. I don't know if it's anything to do with aviation. Nobody really knows because there's no details about it. It could be anything. I mean, we worked in hundreds of different enterprise environments. And maybe the things I know from experience, the things we do may not necessarily touch anything for the core business. We have revamped HR software for companies that do deep tech. We have created issue tracking software for companies that do customer service. I mean, that has nothing to do with the core business. It's a big name we use to work for, but it doesn't have anything to do with what they actually do. So I don't know, but that seems to be the case here.
That probably is. But well, props to their marketing guy or girl. Besides, like, obviously, they're making use of frontier models. I think they also mentioned Claude somewhere. What do you think? Just also probably guessing or maybe extrapolating from your knowledge, what would be their value add if they are building apparently or supposedly maybe a wrapper around a frontier model?
Well, the value add is like we talked before. If they do what they say they do, it's the system around the model that basically gives the model the correct pointers to the environments, the correct pointers to this design systems, like they say here, and the correct environment, the correct information around the whole business. That is basically what makes the model do what you want it to do. Is all the knowledge that you have as a developer or person or technical user that you feed the model to do the work properly. The model, if you just ask it to do something, it does it the path that it knows best if you don't give it any context. But as we know, enterprise level code also has many constraints. Maybe the easiest way to do it is not necessarily the way the company that you're working for wants it or needs it, or there are regulatory constraints that you have to do it a certain way. If you don't know that or feed that information to the model, it will never do it that way out of its own out of itself, basically.
And maybe going one step deeper into that idea that they have, which is also on the screen with the design systems and repository and documentation, which almost feels like a dream world to me. As if we would walk into a client with a legacy system, there is not, or most of the times there is no coherent design system or a documented business rules. It's just like sort of stacked or a decade worth of like logic that is built upon each other, and databases that nobody understands or maybe partly understands. So I almost think that they are, obviously it's coming from a good, the idea is good, as you mentioned. I think if this would work, then everyone wants to have it. But you probably have like months of work on documentation and making sure all the business rules are there before you can even use the system, if they have any system that can process this, right?
Right. Speaking from our experience, 80% of doing modernization in enterprise environments is figuring out why stuff works the way it does. It's not actually coding, it's not actually building the new system or integrating with anything. It's how the integrations work, why they work a certain way, or what rules we need to adhere to. To figure that stuff out that is not documented, which almost nobody has. Documentation always starts somewhere, but gets lost along the way, or doesn't get updated, or there is some senior level decision being made that doesn't reflect the actual documentation. It always happens that way, and that is the biggest pain of doing these trajectories. That's why it takes so long. It's human work to get through why things have been done the way they have been done, and systems don't know that. The people that work on it know that, and the people that work on it know because they worked on it, and they probably didn't document it. I mean, I've seen very rarely in the past that the teams that are working on a current piece of software that needs to be modernized actually have a documentation system in place that has all their decisions, or why they made a certain decision, or why they chose for a certain system that is not updated. Nobody actually documents that stuff.
That's the case. Yeah, that's a problem. And when I was analyzing the articles and the information that is public on the platform or on the DesignVerse, I thought about our conversation of last week with regards to OpenAI and Anthropic stepping into the service industry, where they see that it is a problem, or at least they see that there's potential in helping customers adopt LLMs, their LLMs obviously, inside the companies, and utilizing business logic and improving the infrastructure and existing applications to be able to use the LLMs. So, not to be sarcastic or anything, but is this a sort of maybe a move, a European answer, not so much, but a move that maybe is hinting in the direction of the forward deployed engineers?
Well, the whole premise here is that you don't need to do anything. That's their sales pitch. So, I mean, the whole forward deployed engineer thing is basically what everyone always does: put humans in the loop to figure out the business rules and all this knowledge, and document that at that point in time, so you can actually have the data to let a robot build things for you, or an agent, or whatever you want to call it. That's what the forward deployed engineers do. They are basically the human that documents.
Exactly. And I thought, okay, maybe they have this beautiful platform, and then the premise is you need to have documentation A, B, and C. But if you don't have it, we need to introduce people that are going to build that. So that would be a very good sales pitch, or at least from a strategic angle, that would be pretty smart.
Yeah, of course, that's exactly how the big two AI companies will do it now, is put people in place to document, so you can, well, but you people go a place where you can have the data the way you need an agent to work on it, because that's the biggest problem. The data's not there.
So that would probably, I'm not sure if it's intentional, but that would be probably something that could be the idea behind the idea. So I was just thinking about
It
it
could
is,
be. Yeah.
but will have to hire a lot of more forward deployed engineers to be able to do this. But like we have, I think, certain reservations in believing the LLMs can easily work on legacy systems and improve those without all these things that we just mentioned. So, and I think also from what you're doing day to day, we see more traction in, or at least we think there's more to say for LLMs using to assist in builds when products are built from the ground up, or at least they're sort of like a greenfield. You also have shown a setup that you are exploring when it comes to using LLMs, and that overcomes certain problems or challenges that, for example, with memory and with knowledge. I'm going to share the screenshot that, or the overview of the architecture that you shared with me, and then maybe you can talk a bit about what your thoughts on this particular, like, or this potential is for LLMs to have to participate in these builds. Can you talk me through this a bit on the four layers and the idea behind it?
Yeah. So the modernization of existing software, or implementing stuff into existing software, is something that is pretty difficult to do autonomously because you need to, as we noticed already, you need to document a lot beforehand, and all the choices that you have made along the line need to be having some sort of rationale behind them to feed a model why things have been done a certain way. What we are trying to do right now is to figure out, okay, we can do code assist AI assisted development pretty easily, but that's, developer in the loop. The developer needs to basically prompt the correct prompts, use their knowledge to do everything, to feed the model enough information to help you with the piece of code you're trying to modernize. We are trying to do it differently with Greenfield or new builds, I should say. That's where we try to get to a situation where we are 80% confident that a model can do what we want it to do or do it the ELA5 way without touching the code, basically. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this model that we got together. It's basically 4 levels of rules. Let's call them rules. It's each layer goes deeper into the abstraction of what you're trying to do. So the first off is what we noticed in different models, what they do wrong or how they interpret files or how they interpret different queries. Each model has their own quirks, right? For example, a ChatGPT model acts with code very differently than Claude does. In my experience, Claude goes a lot deeper into the context surrounding what you're trying to point it at, and then ChatGPT that takes it more as is or goes into hallucinating a little bit more. It changes, so this don't take this as the truth because this changes every day, every time a new version comes out, but that's the experience we have right now. So that's why we have the first level as, okay, the different types of models that we use. These are the gotchas, the kind of things you need to know if you're using the model to interpret certain things a certain way. So maybe some models, very simple example, don't use command line tools we have installed on every company machine, and they use their own scripts. We want them to use the line tools that we use. That would be one of the rules. Level 2 is more our standards, how we at ELA5 want code to be produced. Very simple examples here is that all services need to have health checks. We want to have a certain level of abstraction when you are using the MVC model in a project. We want, for example, to use a repository pattern for some types of projects. Just very simple examples of how we want to build code and how we as a company know how to maintain that code in the long term. It's not a good or bad answer. I mean, you can put everything in a file and it'll probably still work, but it's not the way we want things to be done. And that goes into level 2, how we do development, how we do architecture, how we do deployment, what we use, what tools we use, etc. And then level 3 goes a little bit deeper, is done for each language, what kind of language conventions or coding conventions we use. They are not very in-depth. We mostly reference to standards that are out there, but maybe we use tabs instead of spaces, for example. Maybe we use a different level of indentation for certain things. Maybe we want to have braces on the same line or a new line. Things like that, that don't necessarily affect the output, but they affect the way we code. Those go in there. And maybe also, package level things that we want to use, for example, fetch or Axios instead of fetch for whatever reason. If we want to do that, we put that in the TypeScript file. So that is the language level abstraction. And then the level 4 would be specific frameworks or specific project level things that we want to use. So that's basically, if we use, for example, C#.NET, how we want to use services, where we put them, if we put them on the program file, if we put them all in a separate, that it gets injected into the program, how we use dependency injection for different framework versions. If we want to put everything in a file, for example, for certain types of, I don't have concrete rules here because they are pretty specific to what we do. If we use, for example, a Laravel or a Express API or a Django project, they all have different things and different ways of how we use them. But all these together are basically should be enough information and enough context to do it the ELA5 way and the way I, as CTO, want our company to put out code in a specific level. I know it's never going to be 100% good, proper, and there will always need to be changes, but this is the idea of having a good basic. That's why I say 80% should be good enough for us to use.
And suppose looking at this is going to evolve, obviously, with the models becoming better and insights that are gathered during the projects. I assume also that you now have in this representation, you see the MD files that have the information, the knowledge. I suppose you can also add design files. Like if you go, or at least maybe let's rephrase it. If you look at what the guys from the design, what was it called? DesignVerse, yes, DesignVerse. If you look at those guys, what they built, they add a couple of more components, so to speak, to their platform, to their diagram, which is like the GitHub repos of a certain application, which is the design system of a certain application, maybe even the business rules. So I can imagine, like, just because you presented this to me in a sort of like this works for new builds, but it rarely is the case that we have all the information that could work for like existing legacy software to modernize that.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose this is a sort of, in a basic sense, a similar framework that they probably also intend to use, but then they already have set it up for like, okay, in the dream scenario where you have all the documentation and information, then that would work like this, right?
I think so. Again, it's speculation, but I think so. I mean, this is right now something we are testing out, and it might not work. It's all new what we are trying to do. What we are trying to do is basically get the developer knowledge, or the common knowledge that we all have as a team, put into these files on a high enough level that we don't over document, but also on a deep enough level that we have the learnings basically, or the things that we want to do a certain way, or maybe some packages we don't want to use because we don't like them for whatever reason. Um, that information is going to be in here. It's just basically, and the problem is that we can do this really well for a singular project if we were a company that just built one thing. But we have, hundreds of clients during all the years that don't do things the same way. So this is 4 levels that do it the ELA5 way for a language and framework level. But there's always, the level, the 5th level, which is project specific, and that's something we cannot put in here. That's not going to be standardizable, because every project for us is different. Every client is different. Every client has different needs, a different ecosystem, different partner network. If a client, for example, does everything the way we want them to do it, but they have a partnership agreement with not Microsoft, Google, or Amazon, but some other vendor that does something differently, we have to adhere to that. So that's never going to be put in here.
Right. And from the other, so obviously we work for clients that, yeah, we cannot build this in a generic, or this is already a generic way, but then you can make it project specific potentially. But look at for example, Zenday, one of our startups, that if you utilize this setup and then the 5th layer, the project specific information, connecting all the information, or the code and everything, the design files and everything that the team has built, then that would be very specific for that project, and it would be probably tremendously helpful in like speeding up progress, or speeding up development time, and making also scalable, proper product, right? Or
We have tried it out with Sunday, obviously, but there are still some limitations in the amount of the things we are getting into. Is that we still needed to feed it more information after each iteration to make it better. And that's what we're trying to do here, is to gather enough knowledge of working with these models to put it in. That's why the gotchas we have, but that's why we have the gotchas file, is for each model to document, okay, hey, it interprets things a certain way because we work on it on Zenday, for example, or a different project. And we document that to put it in here to try not to let that happen again. But Zenday is one of these things where we already built it, the normal way before this whole AI wave came. So we are trying to figure out there how we can accelerate development without hurting us a little bit. But also we are using it as an indicator of where we need to update these things.
so, yeah, obviously this is work in progress, and it is only, I think, possible since a couple of weeks, maybe months, but probably weeks. So I think as like a software studio, you have a product studio, we have a lot of possibilities to see different projects and to see what works in a generic sense, but also apply that to specific projects then, and then make them better. So I think this is a first-hand view on like the frontier in software development. To me, at least I'm saying that as from the sideline, obviously, but do you want to go further in depth, or shall we leave it for now, like as is?
I think we can leave it as is. I can talk more about this, but it's just our idea of what could work for not AI supported, but agentic development. People talk always about agentic development, and normally it's being talked about by a solo founder, but we are a team of people. We have a team of developers that need to work a certain way on different projects, and in a similar way to collaborate across the board, right? I cannot have one team doing things completely a different way than the second team, because then they're not interchangeable anymore. Because if a developer goes from this team to another team to help out, they're like, where am I and why is it happening this way? So that's why we have a more difficult task of doing these things and figuring it out, because we're not just one person. There are multiple people that need to be aware of how to work.
Right, and that has pros and cons at the same time. So maybe last small question: does this setup, like, is this costing as much as like an employee in token burn, or would you use the local models, or what's your thought on the cost from a cost perspective? This whole agentic development.
well, the developing of the system and testing is costly, of course. But our idea is not to eliminate developers. We're just trying to make them more productive and to try to ship more for our clients with the same amount of people or more people. Our whole business is built around shipping products, right? And shipping them in a way that we can maintain them, but also that the company that we are working or partnering with can maintain them themselves. If we document this properly or utilize this properly, everyone benefits across the board because our developers can work more efficiently, we can ship more products within less time, and we can also offer our services to more clients because right now we are very tied to the amount of people that we have and the amount of output they can deliver to the amount of projects we have.
Yeah, great. That sounds good. So to wrap up, I think we want to congratulate DesignVerse on their funding round. It's very impressive.
For a
For
European startup, yeah, definitely.
So that's one thing. I think we mentioned a couple of challenges that we see. They might have solutions for that. And I think we are both working in the same direction, or at least this is a direction that the market wants. So it makes sense that we work into that direction. And I want to thank you for your insights, Kishan.
Thank you, Floris.